"You're in outlaw territory," Lakota Scout warned, but she had nowhere else to go. The sun had just begun to rise over the wide, empty plains, casting a soft golden glow across the grass that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Clara tightened her grip on the worn leather straps of her saddlebag and urged her horse forward. The journey had been long and tiring, and her muscles ached from the constant hours in the saddle. She had left everything behind in the east, the small town she had grown up in, the familiar streets, and even the house that had held nothing but memories of hardship. She had no family waiting for her, no friends to guide her, only a hope that somewhere far to the west there would be safety and a chance to start over. The plain stretched endlessly before her, broken only by the occasional cluster of trees or a small rise in the terrain. Clara's horse moved steadily, but she could feel its tension. Animals, like humans, sense danger before it appeared, and her horse had been skittish ever since dawn. She whispered soft words to calm it, feeling her own heart racing as she thought of the stories she had heard along the way. Stories of travelers disappearing without a trace, or being ambushed by outlaws who roamed freely across this territory. She tried not to dwell on those thoughts, focusing instead on the rhythm of her horse's steps and the wind against her face. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. Sweat dampened Clara's forehead, and the scent of dust filled her nostrils. She paused for a moment to let her horse drink from a small stream that cut through the plain. Kneeling beside the water, she cupped her hands to take a sip, the cool liquid refreshing against her parched throat. As she glanced at the reflection in the water, she saw the pale, determined face of a woman much older than her years. The journey had changed her already. Fear and exhaustion lined her features, but so did determination. She could not turn back, not now, not when she was so close to hope. Suddenly, a sound from the ridge above made her freeze. A shadow moved quickly across the rise, and Clara instinctively pulled her horse back, pressing it behind a small outcrop of rock. Her pulse quickened. She had heard the warnings before she left. The lands to the west were not safe for travelers alone. Bandits, outlaws, and thieves claimed the plains as their own. Every step could be a step closer to danger. She held her breath, scanning the horizon, but whatever had passed was already gone, leaving only the soft rustle of grass in the wind. It was then that she saw him. A figure approaching from the ridge, moving with quiet confidence and purpose. He was mounted, and his clothing marked him as a man of knowledge and skill rather than an outlaw. His eyes were sharp, scanning the land like he could read it as easily as a book. He wore a feather tucked into his hair and carried a long staff, a symbol of his role as a scout among his people. Clara instinctively knew he was a Lakota, though she had never met one before. Something in the way he moved, the patience, the awareness, the calm authority, told her he was someone she could trust. He rode closer, and his voice, steady and firm, carried across the wind. "You're in outlaw territory," he said, not as a question but as a statement. "It is dangerous to travel alone here." Clara swallowed hard. She had expected warnings, but hearing them so plainly made the danger real. I have nowhere else to go," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just trying to reach the settlement beyond the hills." The scout nodded, his eyes scanning the plains again. "It is not a place for the unprepared. You are lucky I am here. The roads ahead are not safe. There are men who take what they want by force, and travelers are often easy targets." Clara felt a chill despite the rising sun. She had no choice. Turning back would mean retracing hundreds of miles through territory even less familiar and more dangerous than the one she had already crossed. She had to keep moving forward. "Please," she said quietly, "can you guide me? Just for a short distance, so I don't run into trouble?" The scout studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp but not unkind. Then he nodded. "I can take you part of the way. You must follow exactly as I tell you. One wrong move can be fatal." Clara mounted her horse again, relief mingled with anxiety. She tried not to let her fear show. The scout led the way, moving swiftly but cautiously across the terrain. Every so often he would pause, crouching to study tracks or listen to sounds carried by the wind. Clara watched him carefully, learning the subtle cues of survival in a harsh landscape. He would point out signs of danger, broken branches, distant horse tracks, or the faint smell of smoke that indicated someone had passed through recently. She realized that the territory he knew so well was both beautiful and perilous. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the wind, while distant cliffs and jagged rocks hinted at places where danger could be hiding, waiting for the unprepared. Hours went by in tense silence. Clara's thoughts wandered as they moved, thinking about her life before this journey, about the choices that had brought her here. She had never imagined she would be riding through outlaw territory, dependent on a stranger for her safety. But in this moment, she felt the fragility of life and the importance of trust. The scout never spoke unless necessary, but each instruction was precise, guiding her through paths invisible to anyone untrained. Every step they took seemed measured, deliberate, as if the land itself whispered secrets to him. By midday, they stopped briefly in the shadow of a low ridge. Clara dismounted and stretched her stiff legs, feeling the strain of long hours in the saddle. She looked at the scout who had removed his hat, revealing the sharp, weathered features of a man who had spent his life reading the land and surviving its challenges. "How many travelers make it through this territory?" she asked, curiosity mixed with fear. "Few," he replied honestly. "Those who travel alone without knowledge of the land rarely see the other side. The plains are unforgiving. You must stay alert, always. Trust in your instincts, but also trust in guidance when it is offered." Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She felt a newfound respect for the land and for the people who had learned to survive in it. There was no room for carelessness here, no room for hesitation. Every choice mattered. The afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. Clara could see the first signs of the hills she needed to cross before nightfall. She felt a mixture of hope and dread. The settlement was still far, and the dangers were real. But for the first time, she felt a small measure of confidence. With the scout guiding her, she had a chance to survive, to reach safety, to start again. As they resumed their journey, the scout suddenly stopped, crouching low and pointing toward a distant rise. Clara squinted and saw nothing at first, but then faint signs appeared, dust rising in the wind, faint movement that suggested horses.
Her heart pounded. "Outlaws?" she whispered.
"They are close," the scout replied, voice calm but firm. "We must move quietly and carefully. One wrong move, and they will notice us." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her saddlebag and tightened her grip on the reins. She had come so far, and yet the danger was immediate, real, and unavoidable. The plain seemed to stretch endlessly, but she knew that every ridge, every hill, could hide threats beyond her imagination. She followed the scout, keeping her eyes on his every movement, learning, adapting, and trusting. The journey through outlaw territory had begun in earnest. Clara understood now that survival depended on more than courage. It required attention, patience, and the willingness to trust in someone who knew the land far better than she did. As the sun continued its descent, casting golden and orange hues across the plains, she pressed onward, determined to reach the settlement. Though fear lingered, so did hope. And in that balance, Clara found the strength to keep moving forward. Clara's heart still raced from the close call with the distant riders, but she forced herself to focus. She had no choice but to keep moving, step by step, following the scout through the uneven plains. Every blade of grass, every shadow, seemed to hold a hidden story of the land, some safe, some dangerous. The wind whispered through the hills, carrying scents of earth, wildflowers, and smoke from distant fires. Clara breathed deeply, trying to steady her nerves. She knew that one wrong step or careless movement could give away their position. The scout Tasunka led the way with a quiet authority that made Clara feel both reassured and tense at the same time. He moved with purpose, yet he never rushed, always scanning the terrain ahead and behind. Clara had noticed his keen eyes, the way he tilted his head to catch faint sounds, the slight shift in his posture when he sensed danger nearby. She tried to mimic his movements, staying low when necessary, listening to the soft sounds of the wind in the earth. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely alive. The journey demanded every ounce of her attention. Hours passed as they carefully navigated through shallow valleys and hidden ridges. Clara noticed small signs of life along the way: tracks of deer, a rabbit darting through the underbrush, birds flying low over the plains. Yet even these signs could signal danger, and Tasunka reminded her silently that the outlaws were clever, able to use every element of the land to their advantage. Clara's heart pounded each time they paused to observe fresh tracks or the faint smell of smoke carried by the wind. Each sign meant someone else had been here recently, someone who could either be friend or foe, though in this territory foes were far more likely. By late morning they came across the remnants of a burned cabin tucked between two hills. Smoke no longer rose from it, but the blackened wood and scattered debris told a story of violence and carelessness. Clara's stomach tightened. She had heard rumors of travelers being attacked, their belongings stolen, and sometimes even worse. Seeing this cabin reminded her that the stories were real, not just tales meant to scare newcomers. Tasunka knelt and studied the ground carefully, examining footprints and broken branches. "Someone was here recently," he said softly, almost to himself. "They left in a hurry, but they were armed. This is a warning. The territory is not empty." Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but she knew it was not the time. Every sound she made, every movement could be noticed. Instead, she stayed silent, feeling the tension in the air settle over her like a heavy blanket. Tasunka rose and beckoned her forward with a quiet hand gesture. They continued their journey, keeping low in the hollows, moving cautiously toward the ridge that would take them closer to the settlement she sought. The sun climbed higher, and the day grew warmer. Clara's legs ached from the long ride, and sweat stung her eyes. She adjusted her saddlebag, checking that her few belongings were secure. Tasunka occasionally glanced back at her, his expression calm but watchful. She realized that his presence was more than guidance. It was a shield, a protection against the unseen dangers of the outlaw territory. Each step forward, however, reminded her that they were not yet safe. Around midday they reached a narrow canyon where the walls rose steeply on either side. Tasunka stopped and crouched low, signaling for Clara to do the same. "We must be careful here," he whispered. Outlaws often hide in narrow passes. They wait for travelers to be trapped before striking. Clara's pulse quickened. The canyon walls were high and shadowed, and the path ahead was tight. She moved slowly, placing her horse's hooves carefully on the rocky ground. Every sound echoed in the canyon, and she felt as if the land itself was holding its breath. They moved through the canyon cautiously, Tasunka pointing out safe paths and spots to hide if needed. Clara noticed his subtle signals: the tilt of his hand, the position of his hand, the way he paused to listen. She tried to follow his lead, her own instincts sharpening as they progressed. The tension was intense, but Clara felt a growing sense of resilience within herself. She realized that she had to rely not only on Tasunka, but also on her own judgment. The journey was teaching her how to read the land, how to anticipate danger, and how to act with quiet confidence. Suddenly, a movement caught Clara's eye. Shadows shifted along the canyon walls, and she saw faint shapes moving between the rocks. Her heart jumped. Tasunka froze, his eyes scanning the movement, his posture calm but alert. "Stay low," he whispered. Clara pressed herself against the canyon wall, her breath coming in quiet gasps. The figures moved slowly, perhaps unaware of their presence or perhaps testing the path ahead. Clara could see the glint of metal, and she realized with a jolt that these were no ordinary travelers. Outlaws. They were armed and cautious, skilled in moving silently and striking quickly. Tasunka signaled for Clara to follow him along a narrow ledge above the canyon floor. Carefully they climbed, keeping as silent as possible. Clara's hands ached from gripping the rocks, her muscles trembling from the effort. Yet she trusted Tasunka completely, moving exactly as he instructed. The outlaws below moved past, unaware of the hidden pair above. Clara felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the realization of how close danger had been. One misstep could have exposed them both. As they continued their cautious ascent, Clara asked softly, "Why do they do this? Why risk their lives to attack travelers?" Tasunka did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the canyon floor, listening and observing. Finally he said, "Some men are desperate, some are greedy. They see travelers as easy targets. In this land it is survival of the clever and the cautious. Those who ignore the signs often pay with their lives." His words were calm, but the weight behind them was clear. Clara understood that every story she had heard, every warning she had received, was a lesson in survival. By late afternoon they reached the end of the canyon, where the walls opened into a wide, sunlit valley. Clara exhaled, feeling a momentary sense of relief. They had made it through the most dangerous part of the day without incident. Yet she knew the journey was far from over. The valley ahead was open, and open spaces were even more dangerous in outlaw territory. There was nowhere to hide if they were spotted. Tasunka paused, kneeling to study the tracks in the dirt. Clara watched him closely, noticing the careful way he traced the prints with his fingers.
"They were here recently," he said.
"The valley is watched. We must move quickly and quietly. Trust me, follow my lead exactly." Clara nodded, her resolve strengthening. She had come too far to be afraid now. Every step, every careful decision, mattered. As they moved through the valley, Clara noticed the subtle signs of life. The distant call of a bird, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the shifting shadows that suggested movement beyond her vision. Each sign reminded her that the land was alive, full of both danger and beauty. She felt a growing respect for the territory and for Tasunka, whose knowledge of the land was extraordinary. His presence was more than guidance. It was a lesson in survival, patience, and observation. By evening they reached a hidden stream tucked among low hills. Tasunka allowed Clara to rest her horse and herself. She knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands to drink. The cool liquid was refreshing, and she felt a sense of calm for the first time that day. Tasunka did not rest, instead keeping watch, scanning the surrounding hills for any signs of danger. Clara understood that safety was temporary and vigilance was necessary at all times. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, Clara reflected on the day's journey. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the constant threat of danger, yet she had survived. The experience had taught her lessons about trust, courage, and the importance of paying attention to every detail. She realized that she had grown stronger, more aware, and more capable than she had believed possible. Tasunka finally spoke as the first stars appeared in the sky. "We will rest here tonight," he said. "The night is safer here, but still, stay alert. Tomorrow, we continue toward the settlement. The journey is not yet complete." Clara nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. She had no choice but to trust him and herself. The outlaw territory was vast and dangerous, but with patience, skill, and courage, she would find a way through. As she settled near the stream, listening to the gentle flow of water and the distant calls of animals, Clara felt a quiet sense of hope. She was not safe yet, but she was alive, and that was the first victory. The journey through outlaw territory was far from over, but she had survived the day, learned the land, and gained a guide who could help her navigate the dangers ahead. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but for now she allowed herself to rest, knowing that she was ready to face whatever came next. The night had fallen, leaving the plains bathed in a deep blue light, the stars above shimmering like tiny lanterns scattered across the sky. Clara and Tasunka had found shelter near a small rise overlooking a narrow valley, hidden from sight by a cluster of boulders and tall grass. The journey so far had been exhausting, but the danger of the territory had sharpened Clara's senses in ways she had never imagined. Every sound, wind through the grass, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft rustle of leaves, seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. Clara crouched beside her horse, brushing off dust from its coat and speaking softly to calm it. The animal's ears twitched at every distant sound, and she knew it could sense the danger lurking even when the eye could not see it. She felt a tight knot of anxiety in her stomach. but it was mixed with a growing sense of determination. She had survived so far, but she knew that the real test was yet to come. Tasunka, ever alert, had moved slightly ahead, crouched low behind a boulder, as if part of the landscape itself. His sharp eyes scanned the valley below and the ridges beyond. Clara watched him carefully, learning once more how to read the land. The way he noticed subtle movements, the faint glimmer of metal reflecting starlight, the shifts and shadows that revealed hidden positions. She had already begun to understand that survival here depended not on bravery alone, but on knowledge, patience, and attention to detail. Suddenly, a soft clatter reached her ears, the unmistakable sound of hooves on hard ground. Clara's heart jumped. She froze, feeling the chill of fear run down her spine. The sound grew louder, closer, echoing across the valley. Tasunka signaled with a quiet hand motion, and Clara crouched lower, pressing herself against the boulder. In the dim starlight, she could just make out a group of figures moving swiftly along the far ridge. The shapes were men on horseback, armed and alert, their eyes scanning for travelers in their territory. Outlaws. Clara's pulse quickened, and her throat tightened. She knew that even a single mistake could be fatal. Tasunka whispered, "Stay calm. Watch my movements and do exactly as I do. We can get through this without them noticing us, but you must trust me completely." Clara nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the ground for support. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet also so acutely aware of the land and her own presence within it. Every detail mattered: the position of the moon, the shadows on the rocks, the slightest sound carried by the wind. They began to move, creeping low across the uneven ground, using every boulder, every tuft of grass for cover. Clara followed Tasunka's lead, her body tense, her eyes wide. The outlaws below seemed unaware of their presence, but they could appear anywhere at any moment. Clara realized that her life depended entirely on careful observation, quick thinking, and the skill of the scout beside her. She noticed small details she might have overlooked in the past: the faint tracks in the dirt, the glint of metal under the moonlight, the pattern of shadows that revealed hidden hollows. Each observation gave her a small measure of control, a way to navigate the danger around her. As they advanced, Tasunka paused and pointed toward a narrow path leading up the side of a ridge. "We will use that," he whispered. "It is narrow, but it is hidden from their line of sight. Move carefully, one step at a time." Clara nodded, her pulse racing as she stepped onto the path. The rocks beneath her feet were loose and uneven, and she felt every shift of her weight as she inched upward. The wind tugged at her clothes, carrying faint scents of smoke and dust from the valley below. She felt exposed, yet the path offered the only chance of passing unseen. The outlaws were moving steadily, scanning the valley and ridges as they rode. Clara could hear their low voices, muffled by distance but carrying an unmistakable sense of menace. She tightened her grip on her saddlebag strap, her knuckles white. Tasunka moved silently ahead, crouched low, every motion deliberate and precise. Clara followed, mimicking his movements, feeling her own awareness sharpen with each careful step. She realized that the fear she felt was not paralyzing. It was sharpening her senses, keeping her focused, keeping her alive. Suddenly one of the outlaws paused, lifting his head as if sensing something unusual. Clara froze, barely daring to breathe. The man scanned the slope below, his eyes sharp, his hand near the hilt of a weapon. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she felt a cold sweat on her forehead. Tasunka crouched behind a rock, his eyes fixed on the outlaw. After a tense moment, the man moved on, apparently satisfied, and the group continued along their patrol route. Clara exhaled quietly, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had survived this encounter, but she knew that danger was never far away in this land. As they continued their ascent, the ridge narrowed further, forcing Clara to move slowly and carefully. She felt the edge of the slope beneath her feet, the drop below sharp and unforgiving. Each step required balance and focus. She realized how close she had come to disaster, and how much she relied on Tasunka's guidance. The scout's presence was not just a protection, it was a lesson in observation, strategy, and calm under pressure. Hours passed, the night deepening, and Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had passed the first true encounter with the outlaws without being seen, and she had learned the value of patience, observation, and trust. She realized that survival in this territory was as much about mental acuity as physical skill. Every sound, every shadow, every movement could be a clue to danger or safety. The land itself was a teacher, and she was learning quickly. By the time the moon reached its highest point, they had reached a small grove of trees that offered cover from the open ridge. Clara allowed herself to rest briefly, crouching low behind a thick trunk, her hands gripping the roots for support. Her horse pawed the ground nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Tsunka motioned for her to stay silent as he scouted ahead, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the land intimately. Clara watched him, feeling a mix of awe and gratitude. She was not just surviving. She was learning, adapting and growing stronger with every passing hour. Suddenly, a faint sound reached her ears, the soft clinking of metal. Clara froze, her eyes wide. Tsunka had signaled for her to stay low, and she obeyed instinctively. The sound grew slightly louder, closer, and Clara realized with a jolt that the outlaws might be returning to the valley below, searching for travelers. Her heart pounded, and she felt the familiar tightness of fear. Yet this time the fear was tempered by determination. She knew the importance of silence, patience, and careful observation. They waited, crouched in the shadows, listening to the soft sounds of the valley. Clara could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, and the faint movement of the outlaws far below. Time seemed to stretch, each second filled with tension and anticipation. She could feel her pulse in her ears, her senses on high alert. The encounter had tested her in ways she had never expected, and she realized how much she had learned about vigilance, patience, and trust in a short span of hours. Finally, the sounds of the outlaws faded into the distance, and Tsunka signaled that it was safe to move. Clara followed him, careful not to make a sound, moving through the grove with deliberate, precise steps. The ridge ahead offered a path that would take them closer to the distant settlement she sought. She felt a sense of cautious optimism. While danger remained, she had survived the night's challenges and learned more about the land, the outlaws, and her own capabilities. As they continued, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The night had tested her courage, her patience, and her attention to detail. She had learned the importance of trust, both in herself and in Tsunka, whose knowledge of the land had been crucial to their survival. She had seen the danger of the outlaw territory firsthand, and yet she had also discovered her own resilience. Each step forward brought her closer to safety and to the lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. By the early hours of morning, they reached a sheltered spot near a small hill, hidden from view of the open plains. Clara allowed herself a brief rest, crouching beside her horse and feeling the cool earth beneath her hands. She reflected on the events of the night, the close encounters, the careful navigation, the silent lessons from Tsunka. She realized that survival was about more than courage or strength. It was about awareness, patience, and respect for the land and those who knew it best. Tsunka finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "We have made it through the most dangerous part of the night," he said. "But the journey is not yet complete. The outlaws are still near, and we must continue carefully. Rest now, but be ready to move when the sun rises." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and determination. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet she had survived. The journey was far from over, but she was learning, growing, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. The first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Clara stirred, feeling the cool morning air brush her face. She had spent the night crouched beside her horse, listening to the quiet rhythm of the plains, the distant cries of birds, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the grass. Sleep had been light, filled with dreams of both hope and danger. She rose slowly, stretching her stiff muscles and taking in the world around her. Tsunka was already awake, kneeling beside the horse, his eyes scanning the valley below. He had chosen their resting spot carefully, a small hollow surrounded by gentle hills, hidden from the main paths and distant ridges. The location offered both cover and a vantage point to observe approaching threats. Clara watched him, feeling a mixture of admiration and relief. The scouts' experience, patience, and understanding of the land had kept them alive through the night. "Rest while you can," he said quietly, not turning his head from the valley. "The journey will continue soon, but preparation is as important as movement." Clara nodded, grateful for the brief respite. She fed the horse some grass and drank from a small flask of water she had saved for the morning. Each moment of calm was precious. The plains were beautiful in the early light, but beauty here was often deceptive. Danger could appear in an instant, and she had learned that every shadow could conceal a threat. As she rested, Clara noticed the subtle details of the terrain around them. Small wildflowers clung to the edges of the hollow, their colors vivid against the soft green of the grass. Birds flitted between the trees and rocks, their calls carrying across the valley. A gentle breeze brought the scent of earth and water, a reminder that even in this dangerous territory life found a way to flourish. Clara breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. For the first time in days, she felt a small sense of peace. Tasunka rose and motioned for her to follow. "We move now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The outlaws will be less active at this hour, but we must still remain vigilant. Every step matters." Clara nodded, adjusting her saddlebag and gripping the reins. She followed him through a narrow path that led up a gentle slope, hidden among low shrubs and rocks. The movement was slow and deliberate, each step calculated to avoid making noise or drawing attention. Clara had learned well from the previous night. Every sound, every shadow, every detail could mean the difference between safety and disaster. As they moved, Tasunka shared bits of his knowledge with her. He spoke of the land, of the trails that were safe and the ones that led to danger, of the signs that indicated the presence of outlaws or wildlife. Clara listened intently, realizing that this journey was not only about reaching the settlement, it was also about understanding the land and learning how to survive in it. She asked questions, and Tasunka answered patiently, teaching her to read tracks in the dirt, notice broken branches, and interpret the subtle cues of the terrain. Hours passed, and they reached a small stream tucked between two hills. Tasunka signaled for a brief stop. Clara dismounted and knelt by the water, letting the cool liquid run through her hands. She watched the reflection of the sky and the hills ripple across the surface. It was a small moment of calm in a journey that had been filled with tension and fear. Tasunka stood watch nearby, scanning the surrounding area with practiced eyes. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude for his guidance. She had survived the dangers of the outlaw territory so far, and she knew it was largely because of his skill and knowledge. After a short rest, they continued their journey, moving through a series of hidden paths that led deeper into the hills. The terrain became more rugged with steep inclines and rocky outcrops. Clara's legs ached from the effort, but she kept moving, following Tasunka's lead. She had learned to trust his judgment completely, understanding that every decision he made was based on years of experience and a deep knowledge of the land. As they climbed higher, the valley below opened up to reveal a wide expanse of plains stretching toward the distant settlement. Clara could see the sun glinting off the rooftops in the distance, a small but hopeful sign of safety. Her heart lifted at the sight. She had traveled so far, faced so many dangers, and now she could glimpse the place she had been seeking for days. Yet she knew that the final stretch would still require caution. Outlaws could appear anywhere, and the open plains offered little cover. Tasunka led her along a series of small ridges that provided both height and concealment. Clara moved carefully, her eyes scanning the terrain as she went. She noticed faint tracks in the dirt, the way the grass bent under unseen footsteps, and the subtle shifts in the shadows cast by rocks and shrubs. Every detail was important. Every observation could help them avoid danger. She realized that her skills had grown over the past days, that she had learned to see the world in a way she never had before. By mid-afternoon, they found a hidden cave tucked into the side of a low hill. Tasunka signaled for Clara to follow him inside. The cave offered shelter from the sun and a vantage point to observe the valley below. Clara settled near the entrance, her back against the cool stone. and let herself relax slightly. She felt the tension in her body ease, though her senses remained alert. The journey had been exhausting, but this small refuge offered a chance to rest and reflect. Tasunka began to speak, sharing stories of his own experiences in the territory, of the lessons he had learned from the land and from his people. Clara listened, fascinated by the depth of his knowledge and the wisdom in his words. He spoke of patience, observation, and respect for the land, lessons that were as important as any guidance through the outlaw territory. Clara realized that this journey was not only about reaching safety, it was also about understanding the world around her and discovering her own strength. As the afternoon wore on, they shared a simple meal of bread and dried fruit. Clara felt a sense of camaraderie with Tasunka, a bond forged through shared danger and trust. She understood that survival depended not only on skill but also on human connection. The scout had protected her, guided her, and taught her. In return, she had followed, learned, and respected his expertise. Together, they had navigated the perils of the outlaw territory and come through unscathed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hills, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The journey was not yet complete, but she had survived the most dangerous parts. She had learned to trust herself, to trust Tasunka, and to read the land with new eyes. The distant settlement, still far, was now within reach, and with it came the promise of safety and a new beginning. Tasunka spoke quietly, his voice calm and measured. "We will stay here tonight. The outlaws are still near, but this location is safe for rest. Tomorrow, we continue, and you will see the settlement. Be ready to move when the sun rises." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet she had survived. She had learned, grown, and discovered a resilience within herself that she had never known before. As night fell, Clara watched the stars appear, their light reflecting off the hills and the distant plains. She felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that she had made it through another day in the outlaw territory. The journey had tested her courage, patience, and awareness, but she had emerged stronger and wiser. She knew that the final leg of the journey would still require vigilance and skill, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of rest, feeling the strength and confidence she had gained over the past days. The night was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of the wind, the distant call of animals, and the gentle breathing of her horse. Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the tension of the day melt away. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had the strength, knowledge, and guidance to face whatever lay ahead. With Tasunka by her side and her own growing awareness of the land, she felt ready to take the final steps towards safety. In the quiet of the hidden cave, Clara reflected on the lessons of the day. She had learned that survival depended on trust, observation, patience, and respect for the land. She had learned to read the signs of danger, to move carefully and deliberately, and to rely on the expertise of those who knew the territory well. And she had learned to trust herself, to face fear with courage and awareness. The outlaw territory had tested her, but it had also taught her the skills and mindset she would need to reach the settlement and start anew. The first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, painting the plains in soft shades of pink and gold. Clara stirred, stretching her tired muscles as she prepared for the final leg of her journey. The night had been quiet, but her mind remained alert, remembering the lessons of the past days. Every sound, every shadow could mean danger in this territory. She had learned patience, observation, and caution, and now it was time to put them all into practice, as she approached the settlement that had been her goal for so long. Tasunka was already up, scanning the surrounding hills with a sharp, practiced gaze. He motioned for Clara to follow him, and she obeyed, adjusting her saddlebag and gripping the reins tightly. The path ahead led through a series of rolling hills, partially hidden by tall grass and rocks. From this vantage point they could see the settlement in the distance, a small cluster of buildings bathed in the early morning light. Clara's heart lifted at the sight. She had traveled so far, faced danger, and learned so much, and now she could see the place that promised safety and a new beginning. "Stay close and follow my lead," Tasunka whispered. The final stretch is still risky. Outlaws may be nearby, and open plains offer little cover. Move carefully, watch every detail, and trust your instincts. Clara nodded, her eyes scanning the land ahead. She noticed faint tracks in the dirt, the subtle movement of grass in the breeze, and the distant shadows of trees. Every detail mattered. Every choice could be the difference between safety and danger. They moved slowly, keeping low whenever possible, using the small rises and rocks for cover. Clara felt her pulse quicken with each step, but she also felt a growing sense of confidence. She had learned to read the land, to notice the subtle signs of danger, and to trust both herself and Tsunka. She realized that her journey through outlaw territory had changed her. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by awareness, patience, and skill. She had grown stronger, more focused, and more capable than she had ever imagined. As they progressed, Clara noticed faint dust clouds rising in the distance. Her stomach tightened. Tsunka crouched low and motioned for her to do the same. The dust indicated movement, possibly riders moving across the plains. Outlaws. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had faced danger before, and she had survived. She knew that panic would only make mistakes more likely. Tsunka led her along a hidden path that wound through small rises and hollows. The outlaws below seemed unaware of their presence, but they could appear at any moment. Clara followed silently, moving as carefully as possible, every sense alert. She noticed small changes in the terrain, the way the grass bent under unseen footsteps, the faint glint of metal from the sun reflecting on distant objects. Each observation helped her navigate safely. Hours passed, and the settlement grew closer. Clara could make out the details of the buildings, the wooden walls, the roofs catching the light, the smoke rising from chimneys. The sight brought a wave of hope, but also caution. The outlaw territory was not yet behind her, and she knew that vigilance was still necessary. She glanced at Tsunka, who nodded silently, signaling that they would approach carefully. They moved through a small grove of trees that offered some cover from the open plains. Clara felt her muscles ache from the long ride, but she pushed forward, determined to reach the settlement. The trees hid them from view, allowing them to approach unseen. She noticed the small birds flitting between the branches, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant hum of activity in the settlement. Every sound and movement was part of the landscape, and she had learned to interpret them all. Suddenly a shadow moved near the edge of the grove. Clara froze. Tsunka crouched low and signaled for her to do the same. The shadow resolved into a single rider, moving cautiously across the plains. The rider did not notice them, and after a tense moment, continued on their path. Clara exhaled quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and continued tension. She realized that the outlaw territory was unpredictable. Danger could appear without warning, and one moment of carelessness could undo all their efforts. As they approached the final stretch, the settlement's details became clearer. Clara could see people moving about, tending to animals, carrying supplies, and going about their daily work. She felt a sense of awe and relief. The settlement represented not only safety but also the possibility of a new life. She had come so far, faced numerous dangers, and learned lessons she would carry forever. Now, the final challenge was simply to reach the gates without drawing attention. Tsunka led her along a narrow path that wound between two low hills, keeping them hidden from view of the settlement. Clara followed carefully, her eyes scanning for any signs of danger. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After days of cautious travel, she was finally so close to safety that she could almost touch it. Yet the journey had taught her that nothing could be taken for granted. Every step required attention, focus, and calm judgment. As they neared the outskirts of the settlement, they encountered the last potential threat, a small group of men riding across the open plains, their horses kicking up dust in the morning sun. Clara froze, her pulse quickening. Tsunka motioned for her to stay low and guided her behind a small rise. The men passed without noticing them, and Clara felt a wave of relief. She realized that her journey through outlaw territory had tested her courage, patience, and awareness. But she had survived. Each step had strengthened her, and now she was ready for the final moment. Finally, they reached the edge of the settlement. Clara could see the wooden gate and the people moving about inside. She could hear voices, the clatter of tools, and the distant calls of animals. The settlement was alive with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet tension of the outlaw territory they had crossed. Clara felt a deep sense of accomplishment and relief. She had made it through danger, learned from it, and arrived at a place of safety. Tsunka guided her through the small paths between buildings, keeping her hidden from view until they reached a central area where the inhabitants were aware of travelers entering. Clara dismounted, her legs stiff and sore, but her heart filled with gratitude and hope. The people of the settlement greeted her cautiously but kindly, offering water and food. Clara felt the tension of the past days begin to lift. She had survived the outlaw territory, and now she could begin the process of recovery, reflection, and rebuilding her life. She turned to Tsunka, wanting to thank him for his guidance and protection. He nodded quietly, his expression calm. "You have done well," he said. "The journey was difficult, but you followed the land, the signs, and your own judgment. Remember these lessons. They will serve you well." Clara felt a deep sense of respect for the scout who had guided her through danger, taught her how to observe, and protected her from threats she could not have faced alone. As she settled into the settlement, Clara reflected on the journey. The outlaw territory had tested her in ways she had never imagined. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the constant threat of danger. Yet she had survived. She had learned patience, observation, and courage. She had discovered the strength within herself to navigate difficult terrain, trust in the guidance of someone wiser, and remain calm in the face of threats. Each step of the journey had been a lesson, and she had absorbed them all. The settlement, now fully visible in the morning light, was bustling with life. Clara could see children playing near the central square, adults tending to livestock, and traders carrying goods to various buildings. The contrast between the chaos of the outlaw territory and the organized activity of the settlement was striking. Clara felt a sense of belonging and safety that she had not felt for many days. She had reached the goal that had seemed so distant, and with it came the possibility of a new beginning. In the days that followed, Clara began to settle into life within the settlement. She found work assisting with daily chores, helped care for animals, and gradually became familiar with the people and the land. Each task reminded her of the journey she had taken, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had discovered within herself. The memory of the outlaw territory remained, a reminder of danger and caution, but also a testament to her resilience and ability to overcome challenges. Clara never forgot Tsunka, the scout who had guided her through danger and taught her the importance of observation, patience, and trust. She knew that she would carry the lessons he had imparted for the rest of her life. The outlaw territory had tested her in ways she could not have anticipated, but it had also shown her the depth of her own courage and the importance of careful, deliberate action. She had survived, learned, and grown stronger for the journey. As the sun rose each day over the plains, Clara felt a sense of gratitude and hope. She had come so far, faced so many dangers, and now she was safe. The journey through the outlaw territory had ended, but the lessons of vigilance, patience, and resilience would remain with her forever. She had crossed the plains, survived the dangers, and arrived at a place where she could begin anew, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever life would bring next. The journey had tested her courage and skill, but it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit. Clara had faced fear and danger, and she had survived. She had learned to trust herself, to observe the land, and to follow guidance when needed. And now, standing at the edge of the settlement, she knew that she had earned the chance to start again, to live fully, and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. The plains behind her, the outlaw territory, had tested her every step of the way. Yet, it was in those moments of fear, tension, and careful observation that Clara had discovered her own courage, resourcefulness, and determination. She had survived, and in surviving she had grown stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges awaited her in the new life before her.